There's so many handheld PCs out there right now, it's honestly kind of hard to keep up. And for the most part, the only thing that differentiates them is the price and power that you're going to get for each one. But that's where the Lenovo Legion Go is different, because this thing has these crazy controllers on the side that you saw during the intro of this video. And those controllers are an absolute game changer for more than one reason. In the box, you're going to find this 65-watt charger. It's a USB-C charger, and it's got a pretty long cable. I like that the cable goes down instead of out of the back of the charger, but I do wish it had a detachable cord, because that's usually the first point of failure, but it seems like it's pretty high quality. You'll also find this case, which we'll get back to in a second, and of course, you're going to find your Legion Go inside the case. Underneath the Legion Go, you'll find this weird little hockey puck thing, which we'll talk about later on in the video. This is used for first-person shooter mode, and I looked through the entire box and I didn't find any documentation at all. There was a spot that looked like it was made for documentation, but there was no papers in mine. And I'm thinking this is because this is a pre-production unit that was sent to me by Lenovo, and if you go to the store like Micro Center or Best Buy and pick up your Lenovo Legion Go there, you're probably going to find documentation in there. Let's get back to that case real quick. I feel like the case is really high quality, the zippers are really nice, and I feel like this would do a really great job protecting your Legion Go. However, I don't think I'm ever going to use this case again, and it's not because it's not good, but we'll talk about why later on in the video. Before we get into my initial thoughts on the Legion Go, let me give you the specs just so that everybody's on the same page. I will say that I can't post any benchmarks until after the 31st. I will talk about frame rates and that kind of thing in a later video, so make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss it. But the Legion Go has an AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme chip. It has 16 gigs of 7500 megahertz LDDPR5X memory. It has PCIe 4.0 NVMe M.2 2242 drive that comes in either 500 gigs or a 1 terabyte option for only $50 more. The one that Lenovo sent me is a 500 gigabyte version, so I'll be battling with moving my games around a little bit more than the rest of you. I can't recommend the lower tier model because going up to a terabyte is only $50 more, and it just seems like a no-brainer. The screen is an 8.8-inch QHD 2560 by 1600 IPS screen with 500 nits of brightness, a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, and a 144 Hz refresh rate. And it has a 97% DCI-P3 color gamut with 10 points of touch. It comes with a 49.2 watt-hour battery and weighs in at a whopping 854 grams or just under 2 pounds. Okay, specs aside, I've only had my hands on with the Lenovo Legion Go for about 12 hours at this point. And a lot of that has been spent downloading games, updating Windows, and just kind of figuring out how everything works. So stay tuned for a more in-depth review of this device later on down the road after I've had more times to put it through its paces. Now it is heavy, but it's also very well balanced. Most of the weight feels like it's right in the middle and neither side feels heavier than the other. I feel like when I sit on the couch with my ankle on my knee and I rest my wrist on my other knee, it's actually really comfortable to play this way. Then there's the mode where you tend to lean forward with your elbows on your knees, and again, very, very comfortable. If you're standing there and you're playing the game with your hands just held out in front of you like this for an extended period of time, it is going to get tiresome after a while, but it also has lots of other ways for you to play this system in addition to that. The thickness and roundness of the grips on the side of this thing make it really comfortable to hold and play for an extended period of time. I feel like when I pick it up and put my hands on it, my fingers automatically land on those triggers and my thumbs automatically sit right on the sticks. I was worried because they were using an offset axis for the sticks that I wouldn't find it very comfortable, but actually it works out pretty well. Let's talk about the controls, starting with the joysticks. The joysticks are Hall effect joysticks, which is fantastic, meaning that they are less likely to drift over time. And they've got one thing that I love about joysticks like this is when they have a concave top so that your thumb rests in that little spot absolutely perfectly. I feel like as you move them around the side, they slide really, really well, and they have really good tension on them as well. I'm a fan of these joysticks. The D-pad doesn't have a whole lot of travel, but in my testing, I'm not really running into any issues with it. I prefer D-pads that have that shape of like the Xbox controllers. This one has a more traditional layout to it, which is fine, and everything that I've thrown at it has worked out okay. There's a test that my buddy Russ over at Retro Game Core taught me where when you press down on the D-pad and just kind of rock your finger or your thumb back and forth to see if any inputs for left or right come up. And I was unable to get any inputs to come up that I didn't actually want to come up. And I think that that is a good mark for a decent D-pad. The menu and the view buttons both feel really good. You can easily find them when you're searching for them without looking, because they do pop up above the chassis of the controller. But they're both on the left-hand side down near the bottom. For me personally, I would have liked to move their position and swap them with the Legion L button, which is on the left controller, and the Legion R button, which is on the right controller, because almost every time that I go to pause my game, I end up hitting the wrong button just because my brain expects that menu button to be up there. It's something that I'm sure that I'll get used to over time, but it is frustrating early on. I really like the way that the face buttons feel on the right controller. The ABXY is printed inside the controller buttons, and they're transparent, so you're like looking through the button to see the ABXY, which I think looks great. They feel a lot like the buttons that you might find on like my DualSense Edge controller for my PS5, both the finish to the button and the amount of clickiness. So if you're looking for something to compare it to, I think that that's a pretty decent comparison. The bumpers sit up above the triggers, obviously. When I hold this in my hands, my fingers land on the triggers perfectly, and we'll talk about the triggers in just a second. But I do feel like I have to lift my fingers up just a little bit too far to reach the bumpers, and I don't really like that, but it's definitely something I think I'd get used to over time. Let's move on to the triggers, though. The triggers, they are shaped perfectly. When I'm holding this in my hand, there's like the perfect cutout for my fingers that land right on those triggers, and they feel really, really good. Here you can see that I'm pulling the trigger, and it's actually not activating right away, and this would be good if you don't want to get accidental inputs, but I don't see any way for me to actually customize how sensitive the triggers are. I looked all through Legion space and was unable to find any place to customize, so hopefully that's something that comes later, so that when you're playing a first-person shooter, you can customize it to be instantaneous, or when you're playing, say, a racing game, you can have a little bit more control there. Of course, I don't know if Lenovo is going to do that, because they might be prioritizing the FPS mode, which is where you detach the controllers like I showed you at the beginning of the video. On the back of the controllers, we have 4 extra buttons to talk about. There's the Y1, Y2, Y3, and M3 buttons. The Y buttons are just like on any other controller or any other handheld PC that has extra buttons on the back. You can customize them so that when you press them, it'll press the jump button or the B button if you want. But one thing that I will say is you can't put 2 buttons on one button. So for instance, if I wanted to put, like I'm playing Monster Hunter Rise, and I want to put Y and B both to activate automatically when I press the Y3 button, that's currently not something that you can do in Legion space. Just keep that in mind. The M3 button is a little strange, because if you look on the left controller, you have these buttons laid out in a vertical format, and on the right controller, they're laid out in a horizontal format. I'll talk about why that is later on in the video. But the M3 button, that's the only one when I'm playing in handheld that I feel like I activate by accident. So what I ended up doing is going into Legion space and deactivating that button so it doesn't do anything. So essentially, I only have 3 buttons for me on the back of these controllers. But that's fine, because even on my other handheld PCs that have like 4 buttons on the back, I only ever use 2 of them. Now, if you use 4 of them and that's really, really important to you, you do still have 4 of them. I just personally don't like the placement of the M3 button, but it's important that it's placed there for first-person shooter mode, which we'll talk about in a second. On the top of your left controller, you have the Legion L button, which basically brings up Legion Space. It's your shortcut to Legion Space. On the top of the right controller, you have your Legion R button, which will do a couple of things. If you press it once, it will bring up this like miniature Legion Space menu on the left hand side of the screen, which will give you the option to go to the Windows desktop, the Legion Space, your downloads page to look at your screenshots, or a quick way to get into your settings or to launch your most used games. If you press it again, it then disappears, and if you press it a third time, it will bring up your quick settings on the right hand side of the screen. The quick settings are where you can adjust the brightness and the volume without going into the actual menu system. You could turn Wi-Fi or Bluetooth on and off. You can change the resolution of your screen, the refresh rate of your screen. You can change the lighting effects of the little LEDs around your thumbsticks, and you can also switch your console key mapping. Underneath that is the Performance tab, which gives you information about the battery levels of your controllers as well as the system itself. A system monitor with the ability to turn on an on-screen overlay so that you can see how your games are running while you're playing them. You also have the option to change your TDP and your operating system power mode, and a switch to turn on the fans to full speed. The next menu down is your productivity mode, where you can set your external display as the primary if you want to use this thing as your main computer. Well, since we brought up the trackpad, let's talk about the trackpad. It is enabled by default. It feels really good. There's some haptic feedback that I noticed that actually surprised me. Quick note, it does have like a little plastic film over it that I didn't realize that at first, but if you can get your fingernail underneath that, you can peel that off and it feels even better. I like that the trackpad is out of the way, and I don't feel like I really hit it with my hand at all by accident when I am playing. But if you are hitting it when you're playing a game and you didn't actually mean to, like I said before, you can turn off the trackpad at any time in your quick settings menu. The last thing that I'll say about handheld mode when you're playing the Legion Go is that it does have gyro, but the gyro only outputs as either a left joystick or a right joystick, and there's no way to get it to emulate a mouse. I would highly recommend that Lenovo update this with software later on in order to emulate a mouse, so that when I'm playing a game and I want to use it to fine-tune my aiming, I would be able to do that. But what can't be fixed in software is the location of the gyroscope. Apparently, it's in the center part of the unit, which means if you take the controllers off the side and you want to play with one in each hand, kind of like people do with the Nintendo Switch, you can't use that right controller as a gyroscope. And in fact, as soon as you detach the controllers, all of the gyroscope functions stop working. Even if you pick up the device and start moving it around, the gyroscope doesn't do anything when the controllers are detached. This is the biggest differentiator for the Lenovo Legion Go. In the beginning of the video, you saw that I take the controls off and you put the controller into this little hockey puck, and it turns into a mouse if you flip the switch on the bottom. It works really, really well. When you do this, the right controller turns into a mouse and the left controller turns into a keyboard. So I opened up a notepad in order to see what all of the different buttons do when you want to play in mouse mode, or first-person shooter mode, as Lenovo calls it. Let's start with the left controller. The joystick is obviously WASD. Then the D-pad up is T, down is B, left is tab, right is G. Y1 on the controller is your space button, and Y2 is your controller button. Your trigger button is shift, and the bumper is R, giving you access to pretty much all of the things that you would need in most first-person shooter games. Your right controller obviously becomes the mouse at this point, and you've got M1 and M2 on the right-hand side, and they land right where your fingers would go. The Y3 button becomes Q, M3 is the 3 button, and your trigger is the E button. The scroll wheel I do find kind of hard to reach for me, but it might just be that I need more time to get used to playing games in this mode, because you're playing it like a vertical mouse, and as you move it around, you've kind of holding it in like a joystick mode in your hand. It's responsive and it absolutely works, but it's definitely going to take me some time to get used to it, because I was playing Doom Eternal and it was telling me press the E button, and my brain is having trouble figuring out where is the E button. But after a while, I'm sure that you would just get used to it and know where everything is. And when I started using it, I had a tendency to take my ring finger and pinky finger and rest them on the hockey puck, but then I looked on Lenovo's website and they have you holding it more like a joystick, which is fine. It's just something I need to get used to. Like, everybody's going to find their own way to hold this mouse, I think. One thing that I will note is that I feel like when I click the mouse button, I have a tendency to move the mouse just a little bit, and that doesn't happen nearly as much with a non-vertical mouse, at least for me. But if you're somebody who uses vertical mice all the time, which is ergonomically better for you anyway, you're probably going to be completely used to this and not run into any issues at all. The right controller feels like it requires just a little bit more force when I'm reattaching it to the base station. I asked my rep at Lenovo about that. He said that that's just a me problem. Like, he thinks it's something just to do with my unit, and nobody else has been complaining about this, either with pre-production units or post-production units. And I also asked my friend Rich, who runs the channel Fan the Deck, and I said, hey, are you running into this issue? And he says, no, mine's working perfectly fine. We'll see if I can update you guys once I get my hands on a production unit of the Legion Go and see if I run into the same issue, which I don't think that I will. The screen on this thing is great. It's an 8.8 inch QHD screen. If you don't know what QHD means, it just means that it's not a 16:9 screen, it's a 16:10 screen like the Steam Deck, but at double the resolution. This thing runs at 2560 by 1600 with up to 144 Hz refresh rate and a 97% DCI P3 color gamut, which is to say that this screen looks good. Pressing the Legion R button brings up your quick settings menu, and you can switch from 60 Hz to 140 Hz depending on what game you're playing. Currently, there's no setting to make this a per game basis, so you'll have to switch it, but that's something that could always be updated later in software. Now, I've seen a lot of discourse about whether or not it's better to have variable refresh rate or a high refresh rate display, and I'm going to admit that I personally have no idea. What I will say is that I've played on a VRR display and I've played on this 144 Hz screen, and to my eyes, they both look great. In fact, if I put this display down in front of most people I think would not really care about whether or not it's a variable refresh rate display or it's a high refresh rate display. They would just be like, oh, that screen looks really good. It has a light sensor up on the top of the display, and yes, that's the top of the display because this is a portrait display, just kind of rotated sideways. And you can adjust the brightness on your own all the way up to 500 nits of brightness. I know a lot of people like to keep their screens super dark, so here is the screen at its brightest, and now I'm going to lower the brightness down to its lowest setting so that you can see what it looks like that. Let's talk about the audio. The speakers sound great to me. They're top firing speakers, so here's what it sounds like at different angles. I have the volume set to 50%. And here's what they sound like at 100% at the same exact distance, but I don't see myself ever pushing them this high. It has a headphone jack on the top, so you can use your wired headphones with it if you like. I like to use my Audio-Technica ATH M50X headphones with it. They sound amazing and they have a really flat frequency response, so it doesn't get too over bassy, which I think a lot of gaming headphones tend to do. By the way, there's linked in the description down below if you want to pick up a set for yourself. Since we're talking about the audio, let's turn on the fan and see how loud it is. Lenovo says that on quiet mode, the 79 blade fan will be below 25 decibels. Now, I don't have the kind of equipment to actually test that, but what we'll do is we'll put a microphone on this thing and see what it sounds like. Here's the Legion Go in quiet mode. And here's the Legion Go in balanced mode. And here's the Legion Go in performance mode. Now I'm going to switch over to full blast fans. I've never actually had a game crank the fans this high, and the only way that I can actually get it to come on is by ticking the setting in the quick settings menus. But here's what it sounds like. And now here's a game playing. I've got the volume set to 50% with the fans at full speed so you can hear what it sounds like with a comparison. This is my favorite backpack. It's linked in the description down below. And as you can see, I can't really fit my Steam Deck or my ROG Ally into the most protected area of the backpack, and that's because they're just a little bit too big. But because the Legion Go has detachable controllers, that means it can fit into much smaller spaces. So this section of the backpack, which actually is only accessed by taking the actual backpack off and looking at it from the underside, it's got really thick padding there. That's where I want to put all of my most needed to be protected stuff. And as you can see, I can easily fit the Legion Go in there by taking the controllers off and slotting it in. One thing I will say about portability when it comes to the Legion Go is something you always have to think about is sleep-wake when it comes to a device like this. And sleep-wake when you're using Windows is always kind of a hit or miss thing. I tried pausing Sonic Mania for 30 seconds and shutting the game off and coming back after a little bit, and I came back to a black screen. So I had to kill the game and restart it. So just remember, if you're taking this places and you gotta stop playing real quick, you can't just hit that power button and come back to it. Make sure that you save your game first. Now, I have given Microsoft a hard time about using Windows on these handheld devices, and it all comes down to the screens are just way too small on all of these devices. But the Legion Go has this nice big 8.8-inch screen, and because the screen is so big, it makes the touch targets easier to hit on Windows. The on-screen keyboard is easy enough to use, and I don't have a problem using Windows because it's got the built-in trackpad and a nice big screen. So I have to say, I have way less complaints about Windows than I usually have. Now, there's always people who ask me, or they're going to ask me, did you de-bloat Windows before you started playing on this? And the answer is no, because most users who buy a device like this aren't going to do that. They're going to buy the device, take it home, install the games they want to play, and just play the games. And I wanted to talk about what that experience is like for the average user, not for the power user. The kickstand is very much like something you would see on a Surface Notebook or the new OLED Nintendo Switch, and it feels really good. You can pretty much set it to any angle you want, and it's just going to stay there. It's very stable, and you don't have to worry about the Legion Go falling over. Here it is with the lowest angle possible. But overall, I think that every single handheld out there should have a kickstand on the back so that you can set it up and play it at a desktop with a third-party controller or an extra controller if you didn't want to hold it in your hands all the time. If you do want to dock the Legion Go, one of the things that I thought is you wouldn't need to have a dock because it has 2 USB-C ports on it, meaning that you could plug your power into one of the USB-C ports and a USB-C to HDMI on the other one. But because one of those ports is on the bottom, you only have 2 options. You can either put it glass down, which I would never want to do, or you could put it back down, which you don't want to do because that covers up the intake valves. Vents. The intake vents. That's what I wanted to say. So I will say that in order to dock it, I've been using the JSOX OmniCase 2, and it'll cover pretty much any needs that you have. But if you're looking for something more portable, here's this Ugreen 6-in-1 dongle that'll get you Ethernet and a couple of USB-C ports all through that single port on the top. And then you could just put it up on a kickstand and not have to worry about those vents getting covered. But as far as handheld Windows PCs go, I think Lenovo has a winner here. The bigger screen and the inclusion of the touchpad makes using Windows so much easier than on other devices. And I overall really like the detachable controllers, and FPS mode is weird and really intriguing. So let me know what you guys think of the Lenovo Legion Go. And if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this video, or maybe it's over here. I don't know where I put it, but you're going to enjoy this video that's on screen right now. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.